Mr. Moretti, we'll be playing the greatest album of modern times. Future times, all the times, really.
So imagine Prince never died and instead he created his own cult. No. Okay, stop it. You can do better. That's too generic. Try it again. Okay, imagine Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but dark, where the eccentric genius that we haven't seen for years is a pop star instead of a chocolate maker. The army of devoted servants he has working for him are less fantastical looking. And when he sends out his golden tickets, the young innocent protagonist who comes along with their older mentor, this time is more aware of her surroundings and is much more cognizant of the weirdness that's going on. Opus is the latest A24 movie to hit theaters, and it marks the directorial debut of Mark Anthony Green, who also wrote the movie. Opus follows a young journalist, played by Ayo Edebiri, as she is one of the few chosen to come and listen to a new album by one of the biggest pop stars in the world, played expertly by John Malkovich. No one has seen this man in decades, so it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but as we soon find out, it's an experience that not everyone's going to survive. Okay, so I think this movie is very well made. And for a directorial debut, I think this is one of the strongest first outings I've seen from a director in a long time. And so I think most people who see this movie, I think genuinely will enjoy it. But I think the degree to which you enjoy it depends on, it'll depend on the message of the film and how the execution of that message hits you. Because just on the surface level, as a thriller, I think this movie is actually really good. It's paced really well and it builds the suspense in a very steady and foreboding way. It builds the anticipation very well. This movie is very well paced, except for one part, and I'll get to it later. But there's one issue I had with the pacing and the flow of everything. There's levity all throughout this movie as well to release the tension. And I wouldn't call it a horror comedy. But at my screening, the actual director was there and he was talking about how, he self-identifies as a smartass, and the people around him kind of identify him as that as well. And so he was saying that having a comedic tone or having levity throughout the entire process is just how he sees the world. He can't really go too long being too serious without cracking a joke. And you see that reflected in the film.
Sure, you haven't been drinking with us? Okay.
The tension builds to a point, and then there's always some levity or some kind of insert to like relieve the pressure. And that's how I like to frame it, like relieve the pressure, because it's not so yuck that it just detracts from the seriousness or it takes away from seriousness. It's not like certain movies. The biggest example is like some Marvel movies like Thor Ragnarok or Thor Love and Thunder, where the jokes sometime undercut the seriousness of what's happening.
The damage is not too bad. As long as the foundations are still strong, we can rebuild this place. It will become a haven for all peoples and aliens of the universe. Now those foundations are gone, sorry.
That doesn't happen in this movie, but that's the surface level of what this film is. There is an undercurrent or a subtext. This movie is really holding up a mirror to society and asking society to question some of the decisions we've made, some of the priorities we've put a lot of emphasis on. And not only does it kind of critique and question where we've been as a society up until this point, but it asks us to really consider and evaluate how we plan to go forward, and if what we've done so far is a good foundation or a good barometer to determine how we should move forward. But let me just get this one negative out the way. There's one, and you can call it a nitpick, but it stood out to me because in the movie, we have like a very Willy Wonka, like I said in the beginning, we have a very Willy Wonka setup to how we're going about this. We haven't seen the pop star in decades, and then he sends out these invitations to his listening party. He sends out these invitations to his listening party to his new album, which is going to be the greatest album of the century, and only a select few are invited. And with the select few, a handful, there's like 5 people invited to this listening party. And outside of our main character, the other people who are invited, it's very obvious why they're invited. They're people who have very clear and public connections to the pop star played by John Malkovich. And so in the movie, as everybody's getting their invitation, it's like, yes, of course, right? And then our main character gets her invitation. It's very much in the vein of Willy Wonka, where it's the last one, or even like Ex Machina, where it's like the lowly employee is the one that gets invited. It's in that vein, but nobody questions it. And that was my thing, is like, she gets the invitation, and then in that moment, the people around her have like a weird look. It was almost like a scene was cut out, because we don't have any conversation about why she was invited. Nobody asked this question. Even she has a boyfriend in the movie, and we don't see him talk. They don't talk about it. It's just kind of, she got an invitation. That's weird, and we move on. And like, she has no connection. She's not anybody at this business. She's a lowly journalist. She can't even write her own stories yet. And like I said, the last time the public saw this man was before she was born. So she has no connection to him that anybody can detect. And so it was just a weird thing that stood out to me in the moment. It didn't really bother me. Like I said, the film was paced so well outside of that once we moved forward, I was moving along with the movie. But that part did stand out to me. And after the movie was over, I kept thinking about it. And so that was just the one thing, if I had to nitpick, that I felt like was weird. Felt like a scene was cut out of the movie kind of noticeably. But outside of that, the other stuff that I think will be divisive, but I don't necessarily want to call it a negative, is the questions that this movie is asking. The way the movie executes asking the audience the question, I think, is a choice, because there are a lot of things, like when everything is revealed and we know everything, there is a lot of stuff that's verbally told to the audience about motivations and the nature of society. And it's told through exposition. And I feel like maybe it would have had a bigger impact if some of that was depicted throughout the film just a little bit more. I'm not saying that it wasn't at all. But like the supporting characters, right? The other people who were invited, the other people who get to go to Willy Wonka's factory, are very much a product of what this movie is talking about. Like the critique this movie has on society, they're very much examples of that. But we don't really dive into the source of it. We don't dive into how we got there or why it is or any about that. It's just kind of like, this is the state of being, and it's bad. And that's why I hesitate to call it a negative, because it's very clear that the movie is trying to get you to ask questions about this and question yourself and how you feel about this. And so fostering the question and make you think about why and how and stuff like that probably was the point. And so it did that in an effort to, because it didn't get preachy. It didn't, and it wasn't pretentious. So I'm like, it was probably the point. And so if that was the point, it did its job. I just feel like we had a lot of buildup, and then when we got to the end, it was just kind of like an exposition dump. And I just felt like it might have hit harder if, when we got to that exposition dump and we're detailing the woes of society, there was a little bit more to look back on, like when you watch the film a second time, to be like, this was an example of this, and this is how we got from here to here and here to here, instead of just like, this is society and this is bad and how we got here. It is really not a part of the conversation. That was just something that I was thinking about. But like I said, that might have been just me projecting onto the movie. The movie was trying to tell you something very, very specific and get you to think about something very, very specific. And I think it did its job in that regard. So that's why I don't call it a negative. It was just kind of like my impression and my takeaway of the film. If we're talking about this movie in terms of my theatrical rating system, so when movies go to the theaters, we discuss whether we should buy a ticket and go see it in the theaters, whether we should wait and just stream it, or whether we should just skip it altogether. This by no means is a skip. This is a movie that you should see. you should see, in my opinion, with other people, because the conversation about the movie afterward is probably going to be just as good as the movie itself. So we're going to skip it right out. But whether to see it in the theater, is it worth seeing in the theater, or should you just wait for it to come on streaming and you can enjoy it just as well there? Listen, take out the conversation, take out the deep conversation about the movie. That is for you at home. So that conversation is going to be in the car leaving. It's going to be when you end up watching it home and on the couch and talking. That part is for that. But as a thriller, as a horror thriller where Ayo Edebiri is a final girl, she is somebody who is in a position that is honestly scary. That is worth the theater experience, in my opinion. That, on the surface level, this movie as a thriller, to me, is worth going to a packed theater or going to a theater with your friends and watching her move around corners, her slowly come to terms with the reality of her situation, and then how she tries to get out of it. To me, it's worth the theater experience. But also, I think at the end of the year, invariably, there's going to be a subsect of the internet that talks about how Hollywood doesn't make any original films, and also how we don't get Black people in the lead in any films where we're not gangsters, drug dealers, or criminals or slaves. Those conversations will happen again, as they always do. But if you didn't go see the movies where we're depicted in different ways, where we're front and center in front of the camera and behind the camera, where we have a hand on the lever at every level of this production, from the writing to the music to the direction to the lead star. If you don't go and support those movies, especially when they're good, then not only do you not have a leg to stand on at the end of the year about how you don't see the representation that you want to see, it's your fault. And I'll say that emphatically, it's your fault. If you don't go see well-produced movies that have the representation that you say you want, then it's your fault that we don't get anymore. And that's my little soapbox. That's all I'm gonna say. So let me know if you plan on seeing it, if you're interested in it, if you already seen it, what did you think about it? Let me know. We can talk about it, and I'll catch you guys next time.